Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Carlene Gilmore, the Director of Marketing at PBI. Prior to introducing our two great speakers today, I just want to take care of a couple housekeeping items. So first, today's webinar will be recorded, and all of you will receive a link to that recording within 24 hours. So feel free to share that with others in the organization if others would like to see the presentation and they missed it. Also, we will have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the webinar to answer questions. If you have a question, please submit it in the questions box, which can be found on the right side of your screen. Now, for our two presenters today, first, Mike Leroy. Mike is the PBI's Director of Data. He has been helping grow and evolve PBI for the past 20 years. During his tenure, he has been involved in many aspects of the organization, including operations, IT, technology, and now data. Also joining us today is JC Oviedo, one of PBI's business development managers. JC has been with PBI for 5 years and has been dedicated to helping our government and corporate clients learn about the changing landscape in death audit. So without further ado, Mike, please kick us off.
Thanks, Carlene. Good morning and afternoon to everyone. I'm Mike Leroy, and as Carlene mentioned, I'm PBI's longest tenured employee at this point. I've really watched the evolution of this industry from the days when the files were sent to, files and reports were sent through the mail, and then we switched to electronic file transfer, then the online web application with continuous monitoring, the rise of data security compliance and vendor governance programs, and then onto the use of the obituaries as a viable data source to fill the gap left by the DMF, and then finally our latest service evolution, the CertiDeath. So we wanted to start here by talking about some of the changes taking place within the death audit industry. And those changes have been taking place for almost 10 years now. If we want to take a look at the data sources that we use, if you go back to 2011, that Social Security Death Master file was a wonderful source. At its peak, it was amazing. Since then, every year we've been seeing a decline in the data provided, but it also had some other advantages. It was very consistent. The data was complete, and it made for easier automated matching on the customer's end after a match was made based on a Social Security match. If you fast forward through to today, we're now using thousands of sources, over 26,000 to be exact, or close. And a lot of those sources are from obituaries and death notices published by funeral homes across the country. But there's some inherent challenges with using that data. There's not really a rule about how you should write an obituary. So the quality of the data is not always there. There's inconsistent data elements throughout the data. It's possible that you have a date of birth. It's possible that you just have an age. It's possible that you have neither. And it's certain that you're not going to find a Social Security number in the obituary. So what that meant was that the matching that we needed to take and apply to obituaries was very different, and it really presented challenges because we needed to pull out the relevant data from a big text blob that was the obituaries and use AI to scrape the data elements, as well as use AI when assigning probabilities to the matches. We spent almost 2 years designing a system that could scrape these 26,000 sources on a daily basis, and we're very proud of that. And while obituaries, they certainly help fill the gap, it does create some challenges because the quality of the data, it needs an extra view. There's no social security number. And again, back to the consistency of the data, it doesn't always have all the elements that you need to automate any matching. And you need to have staff take a look at each one of those records. And if we can move on to the next slide. So back in the early 2000s, all the way through 2010, if we're looking at this black line on top, that is the CDC number of deaths recorded in each year, as well as the red line, which shows the number of records published in the Death Master file. So you see obviously where they diverge in around 2011, and it's continued to decline to where we have approximately 23.5% coverage of total deaths recorded that appear in the DMF. And so that really led us to need to use alternative data sources such as obituaries to fill that gap. And as the percentage of total deaths has shrunk every year since 2011, and it's I believe it's going to continue to shrink. JC is going to be discussing a little bit more about our CertiDeath in a minute, but our experience, if we can jump to the next slide, in doing actual validation work for our CertiDeath customers is that we're finding, consistent with the number published in the DMF, we're finding that we're validating approximately 25% of the deaths via the Death Master file. We do have some state record coverage, so depending on the state of your population, you might find some benefit of having state records. But really, the obituaries is really making the vast number of our validations consistently across all of the accounts that we're processing. And so with that, I'd like to pass the baton on to JC, who is going to be discussing some recommendations to decrease overpayments, as well as more of an introduction to PBI's CertiDeath service. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon and good morning for all of our attendees. So one of the things that I was going to start first is by talking about some recommendations for clients. Actually, this actually applies to all clients for PBI. PBI, as a leader in the industry, has been able to help our clients with a full suite of basically services that target this specific recommendations right here. First of all is data quality. Data quality is important because in order to provide our clients with the most accurate data notifications, it is important we have the most current social security number, last name, date of birth, and address. A mismatch in any of these fields could potentially disqualify a death from being reported. So PBI can help with a data quality review to see if any of your data points need updating. Second, many of our clients are proactive about their term-vested populations, running a death audit and address search at least once a year. So this is highly recommended as it becomes more tedious and expensive as time progresses. Some clients who are doing this 5 or 10 years later after the member passed away, just becomes really hard to find. Some cannot even find them at all, like any beneficiaries. So we're always recommended to do this at least once a year. Thirdly, is one that is many times ignored and sometimes not valued as highly, but it is the quantification of the debt audit service. So we want to make sure that our clients are quantifying the amount of money that it is being saved through a debt audit service, and also to be able to track any future savings, to calculate the future risks, so that you can basically make a justification if you need in the future to your board, or even just a justification of why you're using a data audit service. This is a very important one because many times it's not as valued as highly. And then when you do the calculations and you make the numbers, it actually comes out to be significantly, and it just helps a lot, especially when explaining to the boards. Fourth always ensure you're keeping up with any legal updates that pertain to the utilization of PII. So you are dealing with personal identifiable information, so it is very risky, and you want to make sure that you're always compliant with any federal and state regulations that are changing. PBI, as a leader in the industry in this scenario, is always going to make sure that to notify you if anything needs to be changed, if our contracts need to be updated. But just make sure you're also looking into that as well, because you're just as responsible as PBI is when handling this information. Finally, always make sure you're consulting with a professional when talking about data audit and data cleanse and address verifications, especially if you're under audit. So I just recently spoke to a client last Friday who's had gone a 2-year process, almost 2 years of being audited by the DOL, just because they kept going into a scenario where when it came to updating their addresses and trying to find the members that were 70.5, they kept running into the DOL saying, hey, you gotta do this. And then once they did that, they came back and said, oh, you actually need to do this too and that. So ultimately, almost 2 years of doing this, basically getting the auditors off their back. When finally they're coming to us to do the whole cleanup. So they told me how much they would have loved to come from the beginning, have PBI handle everything, and obviously save a lot of time and money from getting it basically dinged by the auditors. So with this, I'll move into going on talking about CertiDeath specifically. Let's see. There we go. So CertiDeath, so first of all, PBI makes a big difference because PBI has positioned itself as the leader in the industry when it comes to that audit. And it's because it provides a line of products and qualifications that exceed the market standards. So with a group of over 300 people, PBI offers CertiDeath, which is basically the only solution in the marketplace that provides a true debt audit solution and not just debt data. Although we process thousands of data sources, CertiDeath is able to report as if we were only processing one. So that's a key factor in this product. We're trying to make it as simple and as easy to read as possible. Just basically just like it was back in 2011. It's a full solution. It is basically meant to give you about 99% accuracy. And so you can just basically receive the information, talk to your account manager if you have any questions. But we want to make sure that when you're utilizing a product like CertiDeath, you don't have to consult internally, do research internally, be Googling. It is meant to give you a quick and simple solution with verified deaths. Secondly, PBI offers the highest level of security, being a SOC 2 Type 2 provider with a team of developers and IT security analysts to ensure your data is fully protected. This is key, as you know, we're handling your PII, so you want to make sure you are with the most, secure and up-to-date in technology provider. We've also developed our own internal hashing technology to ensure that when your data is at rest, it is always inaccessible, basically. So those two things combined with our expert teams and resources that we have basically help in the changing landscape of that audit to make sure that you are being taken care of. You make sure that if you have any questions, any issues with your reports, you're always having somebody to talk to make sure they guide you in the process. And that's what we call sort of basically a complete solution, right? Where we're taking care of everything from beginning to end. And if there's any issues, concerns, you just have your account manager that discusses with you, why it was that misreported. Is there any other things that you should be doing to keep up with the industry, and so on. Thirdly, this slide right here is going to show you about the basically the evolution. This kind of ties a little bit back to what Mike was talking about. It is talking about where we were back from 2011. So back in 2011, we had what we call the basic service, and that was all that you needed. You had one source, the SSA, that provided to you about 95% of the deaths. That's all that was needed. So as basically the SSA started to get depleted, we developed something that we call standard, where we started using obituaries and some other sources to fill in the gap. And then finally, what makes more sense now, which is CertiDeath, and because the gap is so big, right? We're at 23% of the deaths coming only from SSA. There's such a huge gap that even as we add obituaries and more state data and more sources, as Mackie was saying, close to 26,000 different sources, it doesn't make sense for clients to be doing the work anymore because it's just such a pain to be able to review information, correct socials, dates of births, hire staff to do the review. CertiDeath basically just gives you the quick solution, right? We are giving you access to the SSA, access to the state debt records, access to obituaries, while doing the full validation process, and there's no need for any work to be done internally. This one here kind of just summarizes everything for our clients. Once again, from a data perspective, PBI is offering you the best in data. From matching, we're using artificial intelligence to be able to identify those matches. We have a full team to be able to do the validation process with a 99% accuracy, and just give you the answer result, which is all you care about is basically who is deceased. And we have about 95% coverage that's nationwide. Next, I'll talk about a case study. So me being particularly been working with government for over 5 years now, we chose a case study with the government sector. We have a $2 billion in pensions going issued to 144,000 retirees annually. And when this client moved to PBI, on our first run, we were able to identify about $200,000 in overpayments. And this is actually one of our top clients. They're actually doing the quantification that I spoke at the beginning of recommendations. They're quantifying not just the money that we saved at the beginning, but they're also quantifying what we're saving them in future months. And the reason we're doing this once again is to make sure that when they get to a renewal perspective or justifying what PBI is being utilized, they can show the board, hey, PBI has saved this money from the beginning and has been saving this money ever since then. And how do you quantify that? Just so some people might be asking that. The way you quantify that is, as we are providing people or our clients reports on a weekly basis, they're basically keeping track of all the debts that we are that they're not receiving through a phone call, they're not receiving through any other source but PBI. And by keeping track of that and then quantifying with a monetary value, they're able to assess on a yearly basis and basically audit themselves how productive the product is. This client, since we did the first initial run, has said that we have identified over 600 new deaths each month, which is 4 times that what they were identifying with the previous provider. So that's a very important factor here. Another thing to keep in mind too is that because of all the specific aspects of CertiDeath, at least from the government perspective, we have been considered, at least for multiple clients already, a sole source provider of this product. And this is once again because we are the only provider and CertiDeath is the only solution in the marketplace with a full validation process. We're not just providing you with that data, we are providing you with death, basically with validated deaths, which is taking it back to 2011, right? When we had the SSA and it was basically the one source. That's what basically CertiDeath has aimed to do going forward. And also, as you progress with more sources, as PBI increases from 26,000 sources to who knows, maybe 30,000 sources, you don't have to worry about that because as the SSA depletes and we're filling in more sources, once again, we're doing the validation in behind the scenes. So you can basically act as if nothing was going on in your side. You're just basically worrying about marking the people that we provide to USDCs and not have to worry about the extra sources that PBI is having to add every year. Finally, we do recommend our clients put PBI to the test. So if you are considering using CertiDeath, we have 2 options for you. First one is CertiDeath analysis. The CertiDeath analysis just gives you a quick mortality analysis of your population. If you think your population might be having any overpayments or you're not utilizing CertiDeath at this point, we can run that for you at no charge and just give you the statistics of the members that we have identified as potentially deceased. And your second option is going for the 90-day challenge, where you can do a short-term contract with PBI for 90 days. There's no renewal. and we identify the number of deaths throughout the 90-day period, and you're only going to pay for the deaths that we find. If you don't want to pay for every single one, you can coordinate that, but you get to try it for 90 days on a short-term period, if that's an option that you might want to proceed with. So finally, if you need to contact anybody about CertiDeath, please, you have our email there, our phone number, and then currently we'll open it for any questions that might be coming.
Perfect. Thank you, JC. We did have a few questions come in. So we'll start with, do we receive a copy of the obituary? JC or?
Yep. So yeah, so with CertiDeath, you are going to receive a link to the obituary. One of the challenges with the obituaries is obviously there's a lot of sources now. So when PBI does provide to you an obituary source as a death notice, you will receive a link to that obituary, and then you can print that and download that as you want to.
Perfect. How fast does CertiDeath verify a death?
Mikey,
I can take that if you want, JC. Well, we're finding that obituaries are often published sooner than we would receive any other death notices from the Social Security or any of our state sources. So what we find is that on average, the obituaries are published around 3 days after the death of the individual, and we're scraping those 26,000 sites every day, so we would be picking it up typically within 3 days. And that we've done some research to show that even when we're going to eventually get the death record, that we still find out about the obituary approximately 8 to 10 days sooner than we would through another source. Now, when we find the obituary, we don't know if in 8 to 10 days we're going to ever get a death record, but when we do, we find that it's typically around 8 to 10 days after the publication of the obituary.
Perfect. Mike, this one's probably for you as well. Will we see older dates of death 6 months into the CertiDeath process simply because of updated algorithms?
That's a good question. It is possible that we're always trying to improve our scope and coverage. So, for example, one thing would be if we found a new source that we had never scraped before. We have, like I said, 26,000 sources, but if we find a new source of information, it's possible that we could be scraping an old obituary, as well as applying AI rules to scrape the data using natural language processing, pulling the data, relevant data out of the obituaries. Is that as we move forward, we find better ways to pull that information out and streamline that. So it is possible that that we would identify a death after that is potentially months old, but generally I would say that's probably a rare occurrence.
Perfect. Why did the DMF decline in accuracy after 2011?
Okay, so the Social Security Death Master File consists of many reporting sources. They have their own interest in monitoring deaths because they are the largest payer of old age, survivor, and disability benefits, so that they have their own interest, just as you do, in tracking and preventing the overpayments. And so the variety of sources include hospitals, coroners, funeral homes, mortuaries, as well as individual family members can call up. But a large source that they use are the state vital statistics departments themselves. And beginning in 2011, when looking at the 205R of the Social Security Code, they determined that with the publication of the Death Master file, that they could not include these state vital statistic records that were transmitted directly from the states. So part of the reason, initially right in 2011, we started to see the decline, but what's also taken place since then is that more states have become on board with the transmission of this electronic death records to Social Security. So the problem has just exacerbated as virtually all states now are transmitting the data to SSA this way. And so that's why we continued to see a decline, and that we just didn't see 100%, the full decline right in 2011-12 is that it's gotten worse over time as more and more of these records were not permitted to be released.
Perfect. JC, maybe this is a good one for you. Other than relying on various data sources, do you do any direct outreach to pensioners to inquire about their status?
Can you repeat that one more time, Carlene? I'm trying to make sure I get the...
Of course. Other than relying on the various data sources, do you do any direct outreach to pensioners to inquire about their status?
Got it. So with CertiDeath, we don't do any direct outreach, and the reason why we don't do that is because we don't have permissions to be able to make calls on behalf of the pension plan, in this case agency, to be able to make calls across all those people and deal with the complications of each individual member. So we do it by sources. We don't directly reach out to each member or to try to verify somebody's disease. The only times you might see that is if you're doing our locate services to try to see, we're trying to find somebody, like our fiduciary locate or sort of spouse, sort of relative, where we already know potentially, or we're looking for somebody on behalf of you. So you've actually told us, hey, we need to find somebody. I don't know if you're deceased or not. And then we're drafting letters, we're making calls, we're doing social media searches. That's the only time we're actually directly outreaching to our clients. But on a sort of a solution, no, we're not making calls directly to the participant to see if they're alive.
Perfect. Do you cover deaths in the continental US only or beyond? Specifically, do you cover Canadian or international deaths?
I think Mikey and I can both answer this question. I know from experience that we've had, we're predominantly obviously in the continental United States. From the obituary sides, I have seen some obituaries coming in from limited areas of Canada. Sometimes they've even seen some from Europe, but they're coming through obituaries and they're very, very limited. I think, would you agree, Mikey, on that?
Yes, we are scraping obituaries that are sourced in Canada as well as Mexico and Central America. There are some extra challenges just with doing that. We have not extended to the European continent as of yet. It should be mentioned, though, that for pensioners that are receiving potentially a Social Security benefit but that live abroad, Social Security does attempt to track and has data sharing agreements with some of the foreign governments and their health departments, as well as they will reach out proactively and do proof of life mailings to pensioners as they get into pay status with Social Security itself.
Perfect. I think we have time for one last question. And while I ask that question, I will be launching a poll, and we would appreciate everybody to respond and just let us know how helpful this content was today. And again, we thank you all for joining us. So with that, I'll ask the last question. Are you finding notification delays due to COVID deaths, due to funeral parlors not always open?
Mike, do you want to?
Sure. You know, we did a study early on during COVID where we did notice that you know, that there were some minor delays in the publication of the obituaries, but I think most importantly is that the word is getting out through the funeral homes. It's just a lot of times the text of the obituary is that a memorial will be scheduled, you know, due to COVID at a time in the future. So it's not really, I think, preventing the death notices from being provided, but I think the funeral homes aren't actually hosting the memorial services as frequently as they would before the pandemic.
Perfect. I think that's all we have time for today. If we didn't get to your question, someone from PBI will be reaching out. JC or Mike, any last comments before we wrap today?
Nope. I think one last recommendation based on one of the questions too, and Mike mentioned it as well, is the ability to, you know, many of our clients basically also, when they're looking for notifications of death or trying to find if somebody is deceased abroad, they are doing those letters out there to get notarized. And you know, if you know you have a lot of people that are abroad and they're over, you know, 90, it is highly recommended that you do send some letters out for them to verify they're still alive. You know, a best practice across many pension plans, and just want to make sure I iterate that out here as well in case people have that question.
Perfect.
No, I just would thank everyone for joining us today.
Yes. Yep. Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And as Mike said, thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your day to walk through some recommendations and the industry trends. And we hope you have a wonderful afternoon.